Cool. Well, delighted to be here with Devi Virdi, and Devi and I met at a conference a couple of weeks ago now. And sometimes you meet people at conferences and really hit it off on a particular subject. And we were talking about how HR supports the business to grow, which is an objective I think all of us have. But some HR leaders really go above and beyond when it comes to linking everything we do in HR to the growth of the organisation. And that's something, of course, we're particularly fascinated with at Top Employers as well. So we felt this merited a much deeper conversation as well. And so thank you, Devi, for joining me today. We're going to dive into the subject because we've just written an article together. You contributed to that article, which is all around CHRO succession into the top job, into the CEO job. Which is very low, less than 1% if we look across indices around the world. And that's indeed what we want to really lift the hood on and see how you've done it, because our viewers today will see your current job title as Interim Chief Exec today. But before we dive into that, if I could just ask you to introduce yourself, how you find yourself in this CEO role today.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all your viewers out there. My name is Devi Virdi. I'm currently the Interim Chief Executive of CSSC. These four letters mean the Civil Service Sports Council. So I'm currently leading an organisation that is responsible for public sector employees, supporting, delivering wellbeing, leisure, sporting events across the United Kingdom. It's a subscription-based membership model, and I've been an interim CEO since September this year. And prior to that, my background, as we are in this space, my background was in HR. I've also been in commercial roles, and then I pivoted back into HR space. And what's really interesting, I think, for the viewers here today is how I've got to where I am. And I'd love to share that with you all today. So thank you for the invite, Adrian.
No problem at all. Yeah, thanks very much, Devi. Because if you look at my background, I've also just taken the CEO role at Top Employers, and my background's a much more traditional background, coming from more the commercial, the client side, or P&L side of an organisation. The article that we penned together really is about how HR leaders can take that step into that role. And your background's rather fascinating because you've bridged both those spaces, but had senior roles both at CBRE, CHRO as well, before finding your way into this role. So if you're viewing this, do have a look at the article as well. But we just want to dive into Devi's journey a little bit to get here. So firstly, I want to ask a question all about really ambition and potential. So when did you really first feel that the CEO role was something that could be realistic for you?
Well, I mean, that's a great question, Adrian. So I started out in HR, in the sort of hospitality and travel sector, very much building people strategies at hotel level. It was about rolling out, talent frameworks, delivering training, right? But I was always curious about how the hotels actually generated revenue, right? So how did they actually make money? And actually, when the chance came to move into adjoining functions in commercial roles, I said yes. And that decision changed everything. I joined Europe's largest hotel operator, a company called Accor Hotels. I spent a decade there, over a decade, leading sales across the region, across Europe. I then later stepped into my very first P&L role as a managing director for Northern Europe for a German travel tech operator, founder-led organization, which was quite unique. And it was a very steep learning curve. But I had a sponsor who believed in me. And saying yes, Adrian, to those opportunities positioned me, for MD and for CEO consideration. Even if I'm going to be really honest with myself, at the time, I wasn't fully sure. COVID then hit, and the travel sector changed overnight. And that people-centric leadership piece became really critical. And so for me, stepping off from being in an MD role, where really our offices shut down in many markets, allowed me to return back to HR during that period. And at the same time, I took on a non-executive director role. That combined sharpened, I would say, my governance and my leadership perspective. But it was definitely, my MD experience that gave me the strongest clarity and, my skill sets very much at that sort of business strategy and that people piece there. And you're right, you talked about the data piece right up front. If we look at data, there are still 0 FTSE 100 CEOs that have an HR career history, right? The old excuse for me is, HR isn't strategic enough, or HR lacks business acumen, right? Frankly, they just don't hold anymore, Adrian. HR leaders are now on exec teams, they're on PLC boards, right? The real question is whether they choose to step into an MD, CEO, or a COO role. And I've definitely built my career around one core belief. When people and business strategies come together, well, frankly, brilliant things do happen, right?
Yeah.
And that for me is where I think I bring the commercial rigor of a P&L leader, because yes, I've been in teams where I've had to deliver growth and I've had to deliver revenue. But at the same time, I feel incredibly privileged to have had a people-centric background that I bring into my day job. And that combination as a two for me now as an interim CEO, that pathway is real. It's very real. And that's where the whole CEO piece didn't just become possible, right? It became a natural next step.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're highlighting a couple of pieces there, which we also talk about in the article. One is spotting the opportunity. That's very clear, what you just shared. There was a couple of moments in your career where there was an opportunity to do something stretchy and different, and you dived into it.
Yeah.
The shifts you made career-wise, but also then the non-exec role that you took as well. And that's something we advise as well for HR leaders. If the role is not full-on commercial at the moment, where are the opportunities? So, is it a new office, a new product launch, a secondment opportunity? How to spot that, to bolster the CV to find those proof points. That's something you've been very successful in as well. So could you point, in your career, to a couple of examples where perhaps you've seen opportunities like that, which you think have been really helpful in making you CEO ready?
There's definitely three pivotal experiences that's really for me shifted, I'd say, the board's view of me being CEO ready. So, aside from the fact that I've been on a board, right? So there's, that piece there. So I've delivered governance work with my exec team, but actually number one right up there is, Adrian, I've run a P&L, right?
Yes.
So my sort of P&L commercial sales leadership piece right up there, being a managing director, running that and driving accountability for revenue and margin, that is number one. Boards read that very differently than folks who only have HR experience, right? When you're leading a region of 100 plus, you're owning a P&L, that was game changing for me. I could prove that I could lead functions and generate income, right? And manage the expenditure, all of that, right? Yeah. Not just support them. Second piece for me was, my commercial track record. So I've been in sales and marketing focused roles. I've been in operations. I've been in client facing roles. That's all about how I demonstrate growth delivery. Even in this role now as interim CEO, I am absolutely challenging my sales team. I can, because I've been in those shoes, right? The language, understanding pipeline, how to plug a leaking bucket, all of that, what does that look like? And qualifying our accounts. For me, those core KPIs, that language of every day in their world is one that I have lived. So I've had lived experience of that. And third for me is very much, leading change at scale. So driving, it's about, I think, being CEO ready was being able to show credibility just beyond the HR piece that I had, and recognizing that actually I've led transformation in organizations. So that's been everything from doing organizational restructuring, whether that was in my hospitality career or even more recently, in CBRE, culture change, right? And delivering impact beyond HR, right? So for me, it's being able to connect, the sort of modernization approach at enterprise value to the board was really critical, right? I think what's really interesting is, then for me, actually being able to talk the language, right, of the sort of everyday commercial language. It's just not HR insight. So I'm linking that together. And here's the nuance, right, Adrian, I find, is that the only other seat beside the CEO that has real, true cross-enterprise view is an HR leader, a CHRO or a CPO, yeah? What I find really interesting is boards often disregard CHROs, particularly in their succession planning, right? Because they are looking for folks that have been client-facing. They're looking for folks who have that P&L accountability. And I think for me, having been on a board as well, so I've seen that on two lenses, is actually the broad commercial experience, the sales, marketing, operational actually mattered so much. That's given me credibility in the eyes of a board. And it's how I can address AGMs, right? I'm of the viewpoint also that, when you are in this type of role as you and I are, it's also ultimately about being able to challenge the market, right? My own lived experience in HR is that role isn't broad enough unless you deliberately step out into that commercial accountability piece.
Fully makes sense, yeah. Fantastic. I think that's going to bring us towards the end of our conversation here, Devi. So hopefully that's useful to everyone. But thank you again for sharing your experiences, your insights as well, your contribution to the article. We'd love to continue the conversation on this platform. You can obviously find Devi and myself on the LinkedIn platform. In particular, it's really we're looking for real kind of practical tactics that we as HR leaders can help when it comes to our organisations making those selection decisions for CEO of the future. So do feel free to share those. If you've got experience of tactics that work, do drop them into the chat associated with this article. We would absolutely love to see those. But thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you again, Devi.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.